The sound of her laughter cut through me like a blade of ice. It wasn't the warm, melodious laugh that had once captivated me at a coffee shop 7 years ago. This was different, sharp, mocking, almost cruel. As I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, my severance letter still clutched in my trembling hand, I watched my wife of 6 years typing furiously on her phone, completely oblivious to my presence. Her face was illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. Her lips curled into a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. "I can't believe it," Sarah giggled, her fingers dancing across the screen. "Mark actually thinks his restructuring excuse is fooling anyone. God, he's so clueless." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had just been laid off from Vertex Technologies after 8 years of loyal service, climbing the executive ladder, sacrificing weekends and holidays. And here was my wife, not only unsympathetic but actively mocking my professional downfall to someone else. I remained frozen, my presence still undetected as she continued. "Don't worry about tonight. He'll probably be wallowing in self-pity somewhere. Come over at 8. I need something to take my mind off having to pretend I care about his career crisis." In that moment, something inside me changed. The pain was there, searing, overwhelming, but alongside it arose something colder, more calculated. I quietly backed away from the door and descended the stairs, my mind already beginning to formulate what would later become my masterpiece of retribution. I had always been the strategist, the chess player who saw 5 moves ahead. At Vertex, my colleagues had nicknamed me the calculator for my ability to foresee market shifts and position our products accordingly. Now, those same skills would serve a different purpose. When Sarah came downstairs an hour later, I was sitting at our kitchen island, my laptop open, pretending to update my resume. I had carefully arranged my features into a mask of dejection and vulnerability. "Hey," I said, my voice deliberately hollow. "I need to talk to you about something." She placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that would have seemed comforting to anyone watching, but I felt the reluctance in her touch, saw the impatience flickering behind her practiced concern. "I was laid off today. Budget cuts, they said. Restructuring." I watched her face closely, noting how expertly she manufactured surprise, how she arranged her features into an approximation of sympathy. 6 years of marriage had made me fluent in the language of her deceptions. "Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice a masterclass in feigned compassion. "But you know what? Maybe this is an opportunity. You've been working so hard for so long." I nodded, playing the part of the grateful husband. "That's one way to look at it. I have a decent severance package, 3 months' salary, plus my stock options." Her eyes flickered at that, a microscopic tell, but I caught it. Money had always interested Sarah more than she cared to admit. I had seen the same look when we discussed bonuses, or when I mentioned a colleague's new luxury car. "That's something at least," she said. "What's your plan?" "I'll start looking tomorrow. Maybe take a couple of days to process this. I have some contacts who might be able to help." She nodded, already detaching, already thinking about 8 o'clock, about whoever was waiting for her message. "I'm sure you'll find something soon," she offered, the platitude hanging hollow between us. "Listen, I have to work late tonight. Big project due tomorrow." I offered her the smile of a trusting husband. "No problem. Don't work too hard." As she turned away, relief evident in the loosening of her shoulders, I allowed myself a moment of clarity. Our marriage had been dying for longer than I had been willing to admit. The signs had been there, the late nights, the sudden password changes on her phone, the diminishing intimacy. But sometimes, even the most perceptive people are blind to what's right in front of them when emotions are involved. Not anymore. Now I saw everything with crystal clarity. The next morning, I began methodically executing my plan. While Sarah was in the shower, I transferred half of our savings, $175,000, into a private account she knew nothing about. It wasn't illegal. My name was on the account too. I considered it the seed funding for my revenge. I spent the next week pretending to job hunt while actually reigniting dormant connections with venture capitalists I had impressed during my time at Vertex. Brandon Weiss, in particular, had always told me to call if I ever wanted to do something disruptive. "Mark Richardson," he said when I met him for lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown. "The calculator himself. Sorry to hear about Vertex. Their loss." I laid out my proposal, carefully crafted to appeal to Brandon's appetite for both profit and drama. I wanted to acquire Elysium Analytics, Sarah's company, not because it was particularly successful, but because it was undervalued and ripe for takeover. "I know their weaknesses," I explained, keeping my personal motivations concealed beneath layers of business strategy. "Their security division is bleeding money, but their data analytics suite is gold. With the right leadership, we could triple their market share in 18 months. Brandon studied me over his whiskey. "This feels personal, Mark." I met his gaze steadily. "Business is always personal. That's why some succeed while others fail." He chuckled, recognizing ambition when he saw it. "All right, I'm intrigued. Let me make some calls." Within 2 weeks, I had secured commitments for $4 million in venture capital. Brandon had brought in 2 other investors, both eager to be part of what they saw as a savvy market play. None of them knew the full story. None of them needed to. The acquisition began quietly, through shell companies and proxy purchasers. Elysium wasn't publicly traded, which made things more complicated but also more discreet. Their shares were held by the founding partners and a small group of private investors, many of whom were ready to cash out given the right offer. By day, I maintained the fiction of the job-seeking husband. I went to networking events, scheduled interviews I had no intention of pursuing seriously, and came home with stories of promising leads. Sarah barely listened, her attention increasingly consumed by her phone and her work commitments. Our home life settled into a pantomime of normalcy. We ate dinner together 2 or 3 times a week, exchanged pleasantries about our days, and slept with a widening gulf between us in our king-sized bed. The difference was that while Sarah believed in the performance, I recognized it for the facade it was. One night, as she was preparing to leave for another late meeting, I decided to gather more ammunition. "I was thinking," I said casually, "maybe we should use some of our savings for me to start a consulting business. Just until I find something permanent." She froze momentarily, guilt flashing across her face. "I don't think that's a good idea right now. We should be conservative with our money until you're employed again." I nodded, as if considering her wisdom. "You're probably right. I checked our joint account today. The balance seemed a bit lower than I expected." The lie worked perfectly. Panic brightened her eyes before she controlled it. "I transferred some to pay off my credit card. Should have mentioned it. Sorry." Another lie to add to the growing collection. I knew exactly where our money was going. Weekend getaways disguised as conferences, expensive gifts for her lover, hotel rooms when working late wasn't convenient. I had accessed her credit card statements online using the password she didn't know I knew. The evidence was damning, but I wasn't ready to reveal my hand. Not yet. By the end of the 2nd month, the acquisition was nearly complete. I owned, through various entities, 42% of Elysium Analytics. Another 15% was controlled by Brandon and his associates, who had agreed to vote with me in board decisions. The remaining shareholders were divided and largely disinterested in governance, making my effective control of the company secure. At home, the charade continued. Sarah had grown even more distant, more brazen in her deceptions. Twice she hadn't come home until morning, offering transparent excuses about falling asleep at her friend Jen's place after working late. I accepted each lie with apparent understanding, adding it to the arsenal I was assembling against her. The final phase of my plan required precise timing. Through my network of informants, former colleagues now employed at Elysium, administrative staff who appreciated generous gift cards in exchange for information, I learned that Sarah had been using company resources to conduct her affair. Emails on company servers, inappropriate use of the corporate apartment, even billing personal expenses as business costs. It was a pattern of behavior that violated at least 6 different clauses in her employment contract. I also discovered the identity of her lover, David Callan, VP of Product Development at Elysium, married with 2 children, and directly involved in Sarah's recent promotion. The pieces were falling into place more perfectly than I could have orchestrated if I'd scripted it myself. On a Wednesday in late October, 3 months after my unceremonious exit from Vertex, the board of Elysium Analytics called an emergency meeting. As majority shareholder, I had remained anonymous until then, working through lawyers and representatives. Today would change that. Sarah left home that morning in her most professional attire, a charcoal pantsuit she reserved for important presentations. She seemed tense, anxious about the mysterious board meeting, but also excited at what she assumed might be an opportunity for further advancement. "Good luck today," I told her as she gathered her things. "I'm sure it will go well." She offered a distracted smile. "Thanks. Don't wait up. We'll probably go for drinks after to discuss the changes." I suppressed a knowing smile. "I understand. Take your time." I arrived at Elysium's headquarters an hour before the scheduled meeting. Brandon met me in the lobby, his expression a mixture of amusement and admiration. "Quite the entrance you're about to make," he said, straightening his tie. "Are you sure about this? We could work with the current management team. Transitions are always disruptive." I adjusted my cufflinks. Platinum, a gift from Sarah on our 5th anniversary. "Some disruptions are necessary for growth. Trust me on this one." The boardroom was on the 30th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. I took my place at the head of the table, my back to the door, as the existing board members filed in. They knew only that the majority shareholder would be revealing himself and announcing changes to the executive structure. At precisely 2 p.m., the door opened one final time. I heard the sharp intake of breath, the sudden stillness that told me Sarah had entered and spotted me. I allowed the moment to stretch, savoring the shock that must be registering on her face, before slowly turning my chair. "Sarah," I said calmly, "thank you for joining us. Please take a seat." She stood frozen in the doorway, her face drained of color. "Mark?" "What? What are you doing here?" I gestured to the board members, who were watching the exchange with evident confusion. "I'm leading this meeting as majority shareholder and newly appointed CEO of Elysium Analytics." I turned to the others. "For those who don't know, Sarah Richardson is my wife, a fact that, until this moment, she didn't realize was relevant to her professional life." Sarah moved mechanically to an empty chair, her eyes never leaving my face. I could see her mind racing, calculating the implications, searching for an escape route. The strategist in me admired her composure, even as the betrayed husband in me hardened against the panic in her eyes. "As I was saying," I continued, addressing the room, "Elysium is at a crossroads. We have tremendous potential but also significant challenges. Over the next hour, I'll outline my vision for restructuring the company to maximize our strengths and address our vulnerabilities." I proceeded with a detailed presentation, demonstrating intimate knowledge of Elysium's operations, financials, and market position. The board members gradually shifted from suspicious to impressed as I identified specific inefficiencies and proposed solutions. Sarah remained silent, her initial shock evolving into a simmering anger that she struggled to contain. When I concluded the business portion of the meeting, I turned my attention directly to her. "Now, there's one additional matter to address. Mrs. Richardson, as head of marketing strategy, has been instrumental in shaping Elysium's public image. Unfortunately, She has also been engaged in activities that violate company policy and potentially expose us to significant liability. I opened a folder and slid documents across the table. Printouts of emails, expense reports, security logs, all meticulously organized and annotated. These materials document a pattern of misconduct, including misappropriation of company resources, violation of our ethics policy, and creating a hostile work environment through an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. I turned to the board member serving as counsel. I believe these constitute grounds for immediate termination, as outlined in Section 7.3 of the Employee Handbook. The counsel, a silver-haired woman with decades of corporate law experience, reviewed the documents with practiced efficiency. Her expression revealed nothing, but the slight nod she gave me confirmed what I already knew. Mr. Richardson is correct. These violations, if proven, would warrant termination under our current policies. Sarah finally found her voice, though it trembled with barely controlled fury. This is absurd. A personal vendetta disguised as corporate governance. I'll sue for wrongful termination. I remained impassive. The evidence speaks for itself, Sarah. But if you prefer, we can discuss these matters in detail, including your relationship with David Callan and your creative use of the corporate expense account to fund your affair. At the mention of David's name, several board members exchanged glances. David was well respected within the company, his marriage and family life a regular topic of casual conversation. Sarah's face flushed with anger and humiliation. You orchestrated this entire thing just to get back at me for what, exactly? I interrupted, my voice dangerously soft. For betraying our marriage? For mocking my job loss? For lying to my face day after day? No, Sarah. I didn't orchestrate this to get back at you. I orchestrated it because I saw an undervalued company with tremendous potential, currently hampered by unprofessional behavior and ethical violations. As CEO, it's my responsibility to address those issues. I turned back to the board. Unless there are objections, I move that we terminate Sarah Richardson's employment with Elysium Analytics, effective immediately. The vote was quick and unanimous. Even Brandon, who had initially questioned my motives, raised his hand in support, not because they particularly cared about marital fidelity or personal vendettas, but because the evidence of professional misconduct was irrefutable and no one wanted to align themselves with the losing side. I watched as security was called to escort Sarah from the building, her belongings to be packed and sent to our home address. Her face as she left was a study in contradictory emotions: rage, humiliation, disbelief, and beneath it all, a dawning recognition of just how completely she had been outmaneuvered. The aftermath unfolded more or less as I had anticipated. David Callan resigned the following day, hoping to outrun the scandal. He blocked Sarah's number and emails, choosing to save his marriage and what remained of his professional reputation rather than stand by her. The coward's way out, but exactly what I had expected from a man who pursued married women and abused his position of authority. Sarah moved out of our house within a week, taking only her personal belongings. I filed for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences rather than infidelity. I had no desire to drag our private life through the courts more than necessary. The prenuptial agreement we had signed ensured a clean financial separation, especially given her breach of the fidelity clause. She tried calling several times in the first month, alternating between tearful apologies and vicious accusations. I let each call go to voicemail, listening to her messages with clinical detachment, hearing the progression from denial to anger to desperate bargaining. I recognized the stages of grief. She was mourning the life she had lost, the security she had taken for granted, the future she had carelessly gambled away. Meanwhile, I immersed myself in revitalizing Elysium. The company had solid foundations, but had grown complacent under mediocre leadership. I implemented structural changes, reallocated resources to high-performing divisions, and recruited top talent from competitors, including Vertex. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company that had discarded me was now watching their best people leave for the opportunity to work with me. Brandon and his investors were delighted as quarterly results began to reflect our strategic shifts. Share value increased by 22% in the first 6 months under my leadership, and industry analysts who had previously overlooked Elysium were now paying attention. I occasionally heard updates about Sarah through mutual acquaintances. She had struggled to find employment in our relatively close-knit industry, her dramatic exit from Elysium following her like a shadow. She had eventually taken a position with a small firm in another state at a significantly reduced salary and title. David, I learned, had weathered the storm better, finding a role with a startup after a few months of consulting. Men like him always seemed to land on their feet, though his marriage had reportedly ended despite his abandonment of Sarah. I felt no particular satisfaction in their struggles. The revenge that had initially fueled my actions had burned away, leaving behind something cooler and more sustainable. A sense of justice served, of balance restored. I had transformed betrayal into opportunity, humiliation into success. The accumulation of wealth and professional recognition were merely pleasant side effects of reclaiming control of my life. On the 1-year anniversary of my layoff from Vertex, I stood at the window of my corner office at Elysium, looking out over the city as evening descended. My assistant had left a bottle of champagne on my desk with a note congratulating me on the company's record-breaking quarter. I hadn't planned to celebrate, but as I reflected on the journey of the past year, it seemed appropriate to acknowledge how far I had come. I poured a single glass and raised it in a solitary toast. Not to success or revenge or even survival, but to the unexpected gift that Sarah and Vertex had inadvertently given me, the opportunity to discover my own resilience, to rebuild my life on more authentic foundations. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire, the architectural engineer I had been dating for the past 2 months. She was intelligent, direct, and refreshingly honest, qualities I now valued far more than the superficial attraction that had initially drawn me to Sarah. "Dinner still on for 8? I have news about the Tokyo project." I smiled, typing a quick confirmation. The past was finally where it belonged. Behind me, a closed chapter in a story that continued to unfold in unexpected and promising ways. As I prepared to leave the office, I caught sight of my reflection in the window glass. I looked different than I had a year ago. More confident, certainly, but also more at peace. The man who had stood shell-shocked in his bedroom doorway, severance letter in hand, hearing his wife mock his misfortune, seemed like a stranger now. That man had been defined by what was done to him. This man, the one looking back at me from the glass, was defined by what he had done in response, by the choices he had made, the strength he had found, and the future he was actively creating. The greatest revenge I had discovered wasn't in destroying Sarah's life or career. It was in refusing to let her betrayal define or diminish me, in rising from the ashes of that betrayal to build something better, stronger, and ultimately more fulfilling than what I had lost. I switched off my office light and headed out, leaving the empty champagne glass on my desk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moves in the endless game of strategy that was business and life. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was genuinely looking forward to all of it. The checkmate I had engineered hadn't just been about winning the game against Sarah. It had been about freeing myself to play a better, more meaningful game altogether. One where victory wasn't measured in another's defeat, but in my own growth, resilience, and capacity for genuine happiness. And that, I realized as I stepped into the elevator, was the most devastating revenge of all. To not just survive betrayal, but to thrive because of it. To transform pain into power, and loss into liberation. to write a new story where the ones who tried to break you become nothing more than forgotten characters in the opening chapters of your success. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.